Hi folks. So good afternoon. I am Samantha Mccomb. I am the librarian of the Linnenhall Library, and I am very pleased to be here today to talk about the library's political collection and the rich resources we hold in relation to peace. For those of you who maybe don't know, the Linnenhall Library is a membership library in the heart of Belfast city centre, described by the poet Michael Longley as the soul of Belfast. It is renowned for its Irish and local studies collection, ranging from comprehensive holdings of early Belfast and provincial printed books to the world-renowned Northern Ireland political collection, which really is the definitive archive of the recent Troubles. The library also boasts the largest collection of material relating to the poet Robert Burns outside of Scotland, and an expansive theatre and performing arts archive. Really unique collections which reflect our very rich cultural heritage. Library team answer around 5,000 collection-based queries a year, and we have student, academic and citizen researchers visiting us from Belfast, from Europe, from Australia, from Canada and the United States. We also have a high profile as a centre of cultural and creative life, offering a varied programme of events ranging from monthly exhibitions to readings, lectures, book groups, language classes and genealogy workshops. We are also an accredited museum and a 4-star visitor attraction, and we welcome visitors on daily tours of the building and exhibits. It really is a very vibrant and exciting space. It is literally crammed full of knowledge, and it is alive with history. And we feel the Linnenhall's history and collections is intrinsically linked to the story of Belfast, and the library has a pivotal role to play in understanding all of Northern Ireland's past. So just by way of background, the Belfast Library and Society for Promoting Knowledge, which is the official name of the institution, more commonly known as the Linnenhall Library, developed from the Belfast Reading Society, which was founded on the 13th of May 1788. It is the oldest library in Belfast, and it is the last subscription library in Ireland. The Society was a local expression of a widespread British, European and North American movement for self-improvement. Such reading societies sprang up in many cities, towns and villages, and were particularly influenced in Ireland in the latter part of the 18th century by the liberal and egalitarian principles of the American and French revolutions. We are a product of the Enlightenment. Now, from its beginnings, the Belfast Library and Society for Promoting Knowledge was an institution whose central aim was to run a subscription library for the benefit of its members, and the Society and Library was, and to a certain extent still is, financed, managed and administered by its members, and the independence of the library really is integral to its collecting, and that is especially relevant in relation to the political collection. So, in 1968, the then librarian Jimmy Biddy was handed a civil rights leaflet in a city centre bar. He kept it, he brought it back to the library, and since then the Linnenhall has sought to collect all printed material relating to the Troubles, peace process and post-conflict society in Northern Ireland. And the collection has grown to some 350,000 items. Items including books, pamphlets, leaflets, objects, posters, manifestos, press releases, newspapers, journals and periodicals, you name it, we've got it. To the best of our knowledge, it is the only collection to have been collected contemporaneously during a complete period of civil unrest. We believe no other institution has collected such a comprehensive range of material relating to a modern political conflict. The collection documents the activities of all parties to the conflict, from paramilitaries to government, and we believe many items in the collection are held in the Linnenhall Library only. Today, we use the Northern Ireland political collection to help this generation, who have no lived experience of the Troubles and are being taught it as history, to understand our shared past. So, as well as the traditional means of acquisition, because of the type of material being collected, the library had to be imaginative in its collecting. Contemporary accounts report that during the height of the Troubles, staff literally climbed over barricades to retrieve items, and there were outings with ladders and secateurs the day after elections to retrieve posters from lampposts. We take photographs of them now. It's much less hazardous to help. The collection now holds over 17,000 books and pamphlets, and the periodical collection really is unprecedented. But academic studies and government publications are housed alongside more ephemeral items such as election flyers, badges, posters, postcards and Christmas cards. The ephemera is a particular strength of the collection, from minuscule messages written on cigarette papers by hunger strikers in the 1980s, known as Mccomb, to the original pan, clandestinely produced by Mays prison inmates for the 1983 IRA escape plan, and rarely seen photographs of the main political players. The collection includes highly topical items such as news sheets and handbills, which were easily disposed of, and only for Jimmy Viddy's foresight, much of what we now hold would have been lost. Paramilitary and pressure groups had limited direct access to the media for propaganda purposes, so cheap print publications really was how they got their messages across. Many of these items had very short print runs, and as mentioned in a number of instances, the library holds the only copies in existence. Collecting such material was not easy. Much of it would have been considered seditious and therefore illegal at the time, but the library's independent status, connections and reputation has meant that it has had the freedom to collect material without fear or favour. And once the collection became established, both political parties and paramilitary organisations from all sides readily donated their publications. The collection really has relied on donations over the years, continues to do so, not least in relation to the many significant archives which have been donated to the library, archives such as the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, which is one of our largest archives, over 30 boxes of archival material. The Northern Ireland Women's Rights Movement Archive, the Women's Rights Movement established in 1975. It acted as an umbrella organisation for women in both nationalist and unionist areas. We also have the personal archive of Tom Hartley's a leading figure in Sinn Féin and a local historian, and voluntary-led organisation Queer Space. We are privileged to hold a substantial amount of insightful and informative LGBTQ material in the Northern Ireland political collection. And there are several thousand posters in the political collection. These posters give real insight into the period. They are the physical remnants of the times in which they were collected, and they serve as historical documents that help us to better understand those times. They convey the messages of the moment, they stir emotions, they encourage reflection, or in many cases they promote action. The Northern Ireland Women's Rights Movement poster here is one of many in the collection to use the image of a dove to denote peace. Now, the Lindenhol's first exhibition of political posters was back in 1986, and it was entitled Troubled Images. Troubled Images recently got a reboot with the production of an iBook. All major events from the Troubles are explored in a chronological, interactive history textbook for use in schools. The Lindenhall has always been a neutral, shared space, and we are proud of our reputation as a welcoming and inclusive space. In a society where there has been perceived exclusion, the Lindenhall's inclusiveness is essential. In relation to the political collection, there is integrity, balance, and shades of opinion. All shades of opinion are represented. An example being, if you have visited the library, the very carefully and balanced selection of posters that are on display in the vertical gallery. There is no bias or judgment. We collect and let the collection and objects speak for themselves. And there is no censorship. We jokingly refer to there being something to offend everyone in the political collection. Whilst it is challenging to document the recent past, the collection is vitally important, politically, socially. It is important locally, nationally and internationally as the collective memory of the Troubles, peace process and post-conflict society. And while we welcome and encourage members and visitors to come to the library to consult our amazing collections, it is a strategic priority of the Lindenhall to utilise digitisation as both a preservation and accessibility tool. And much of the political collection, largely relating to the 1990s period, is accessible via our Divided Society resource and the web addresses there. Senator George Mitchell, who chaired the all-party talks which led to the Good Friday Agreement, wrote an introduction to the resource. In it he said, the peace talks were a long and difficult process, and this archive provides its users with a sense of the atmosphere of the time, the issues affecting daily life, how they were debated, and the various attempts at a resolution. He said at the time that the resource was launched, some of these issues remain, but are solvable if the political leaders are willing to engage and talk. Feels somewhat ironic now. Focusing on the period from 1990 to 1998, the project saw the digitisation of over 500 journals comprising thousands of individual issues. The publications came from a variety of perspectives, including community groups, voluntary groups, political parties, pressure groups, local and national government and paramilitaries. Around 800 posters were also digitised, along with video footage and specially commissioned essays from leading academics. The essays really are fantastic. I would encourage you to look at those. Having developed links with the Council for the Curriculum, Examinations and Assessment to reflect the new topic of Northern Ireland during the 1990s, the project also produced educational toolkits, making the collections at the Linen Hall all the more relevant and helping us engage with the next generations of users of the library. During development workshops with schools, pupils enjoyed learning about the importance of the Good Friday Agreement, visits by President Clinton, and the first days of the Northern Ireland Assembly. The toolkits are available to download from the website. The project also included an intergenerational reminiscence project. Intergenerational work took place with young and older members of the community across Northern Ireland. During those sessions, participants talked about their personal experiences, lasting legacies, hopes for the future, personal losses and life changes, and these oral histories were all captured and really do give unique insight into the period. So, it is, just to emphasise, it's freely available. The website is curated. It focuses on 24 key themes, such as ceasefires, decommissioning and elections. Now, I am always reluctant to risk live demonstrations during a presentation, but to show you how easy it is to use, I logged on. It is a very straightforward one-time registration for new users. I selected themes, which, if you can see, is highlighted now in yellow, from which I chose peace talks. This theme category has 3,528 documents, of which 2,948 are articles from community newsletters, journals and periodicals. But for ease of reference, the topics covered within all of those documents are displayed. Topics such as the multi-party talks, the Mitchell Principles, the Framework Agreement, Independent Monitoring Commission, etc. Each topic is a live link to the material relating to that topic, so it really is easy to narrow down your area of interest. Timelines help you negotiate the content and remind us of all of those events that took place during that momentous period. And key players such as community activists, local and national politicians and international statesmen are tagged. Examples include Albert Reynolds, Dick Spring, John Major. For illustration, I clicked on the link for ex-Taoiseach John Bruton, and from the aforementioned thousands of articles on peace talks, John Bruton features in 123. And to put the time period in context, the site includes video clips from the archives of UTV and RTE, and as I mentioned, the specially commissioned essays from leading academics such as Professor Thomas Hennessy and Professor Marianne Elliott, writing about the Good Friday Agreement and sectarianism in Northern Ireland, respectively. There are also a number of posters included in the Peace Talks results. Examples here include posters relating to the yes and no campaigns to the Good Friday Agreement and the subsequent referendum. The Yes campaign was established in March 1998 for the sole purpose of arguing and advertising for a yes vote in the May referendum. The campaign spent over £300,000 in promoting a yes vote. It aimed to target potential floating sectors of the electorate, including, in their words, middle class, middle of the road, women and new voters. I think I fall into a few of those categories. There is an inference that the use of the colour blue, a colour associated with unionism and conservatism, reflected particular concern that a yes vote was more assured from the nationalist and republican communities. The newsletters Say Yes and Say It Loud is an example of the most ephemeral of political posters, the newspaper placard. How often do we see those nowadays? Now, this is one of the most iconic posters in the Northern Ireland political collection, and it is on permanent display in the library. I walk past Betty Williams every day in the library and am inspired every day. She dominates this Peace People poster, and it's Stop the War message. Betty Williams was born on the 22nd of May 1943 in Belfast. Her father worked as a butcher and her mother was a housewife. Betty received her primary education at St Teresa's Primary School and attended St Dominic's High School. Upon completing her education, she worked as an office receptionist. Her father was a Protestant, her mother was a Catholic, a family background from which Williams later said she derived religious tolerance and a breadth of vision that motivated her to work for peace. Early in the 1970s, she joined an anti-violence campaign, which she credits with preparing her to eventually find her own peace movement, the Peace People. Betty Williams was drawn into the public arena after witnessing the death of 3 children on the 10th of August 1976, when they were hit by a car whose driver, an IRA operative named Danny Lennon, had been shot in return fire by a soldier. Williams was driving in her car with one of her own children when she witnessed the incident, and as she turned the corner to her home, she saw the 3 children crushed by the swerving car, and she rushed to help. Andrew Maguire, who was just 6 weeks old and in his pram, died instantly, as did his sister Joanne, who was 8 and had been riding her bicycle. Their brother John, aged 2.5, died the following day in hospital. Their mother, Anne Maguire, was maimed physically and mentally by the tragedy. At the time, her sister, Mairead Corrigan, made a grief-stricken appeal on television for peace. The incident struck a note with the community and the wider world. Betty Williams was so moved by it that within days she had obtained 6,000 signatures on a petition for peace, which gained wide media attention. She co-founded the Women for Peace, which later, with co-founders Kieran Mccomb and Mairead Corrigan, later Mairead Maguire, became the Community for Peace People. The group organised a peace march to the graves of the children, which was attended by some 10,000 women. However, the peaceful march was violently disrupted. Undeterred, the following week there was another march that concluded without incident, this time with some 35,000 participants. At that time, Williams declared the Declaration of the Peace People. We have a simple message to the world from this movement for peace. We want to live and love and build a just and peaceful society. We want for our children, as we want for ourselves, our lives at home, at work and at play, to be lives of joy and peace. We recognise that to build such a society demands dedication, hard work and courage. We recognise that there are many problems in our society which are a source of conflict and violence. We recognise that every bullet fired and every exploding bomb make that work more difficult. We reject the use of the bomb and the bullet and all the techniques of violence. We dedicate ourselves to working with our neighbours, near and far, day in and day out, to build that peaceful society in which the tragedies we have known are a bad memory and a continuing warning. More than 100,000 people signed the declaration, and in the weeks and months that followed, the groups formed street groups, they led rallies and they campaigned in the United States. Thousands joined them in marches across Northern Ireland, and one of their most high-profile rallies was held in London's Trafalgar Square when folk singer and activist, folk singer and activist Joan Baez serenaded the crowd. In recognition of their efforts for peace, Betty Williams and Mairead Corrigan became joint recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize in 1977, the prize being for 1976. Now, there are many resources in the political collection which relate to the Peace People, which reflect the triumphs, challenges and complexities of the group and the key players. And of those, a real treasure is the inaugural edition of Piece by Piece, the magazine of the Peace People from October 1976. So from this incident in August to October, they had completely mobilised. They were producing publications, all of these rallies. In its introduction, Betty Williams outlines how her life had been turned upside down. She references the 8 weeks of peace since the incident and says, "So far it hasn't stopped the killings or bombings, very soon it will. Our self-respect is returning day by day. Our faces look happier, our smiles are wider, our backs have straightened, and our courage is right out there for the world to see. Carrying a gun is easy, not carrying a gun is brave. And in 8 short weeks, the thousands of people on the streets of Northern Ireland have shown they are the heroes, not Betty Williams or Mairead Corrigan, but everyone who took part in those rallies." The editor of Piece by Piece was Kieran Mccomb. As you may have read, Kieran Mccomb died recently, aged 76, and his obituary in the Irish Times included a family statement that he became the Peace People's chief strategist and sketched out a plan of rallies and marches for peace, which saw hundreds of thousands of people take to the streets in Northern Ireland, Dublin, London and elsewhere to call for an end to violence. The statement added, seeing an opportunity to make a difference, he stepped down from his role as a journalist to devote himself full-time to peace activism, editing the movement's newspaper, writing the Declaration of the Peace People, and numerous pamphlets setting out a strategy of non-violence with a view to achieving peace and justice in Northern Ireland and globally. The period saw a steep fall in the level of violence in Northern Ireland. Speaking of the incident in 1976, Mr. Mccomb said the community as a whole had got to the point where it was saying enough is enough. No matter what the problems are or were, violence only makes them worse. Although at the fore in the Peace and People movement, Mccomb was not included in the Nobel Prize, perhaps because the movement was portrayed in the media and perceived internationally as a woman's strive for peace. Quoted in the Peace People Experience by Rob Fairmichael, written in 1987, Mr. Mccomb said, there was an embarrassing attempt to deify us in some circles, to suggest we were divinely sent, that we were some kind of reflected trinity, in which Betty was the heart, Mairead was the soul, and me the head. Or sometimes it was guts, heart and head in the same order. Certainly he said it was an astonishing relationship. The Nobel oversight does not diminish Mr. Mccomb's role, and he was involved with the Peace People for several years, and in 1978 became the first person from Northern Ireland to address the General Assembly of the United Nations when he delivered a speech on behalf of the International Fellowship of Reconciliation. He later returned to journalism, working at various times for the Irish News, the Newsletter and the Daily Mirror. Mairead Maguire has dedicated her life to promoting peace since the death of her sister Anne Maguire's children in the incident in August 1976. Writing in the inaugural edition of Piece by Piece, Mairead said, if anyone were to ask me what was the most important thing that has happened since the Peace People movement has begun, I would say you. By you, I mean the wonderful people of Northern Ireland who have come out to shake hands and hug us, to cry openly and to say with great gentleness and sincerity, thank you. Please keep up the work for peace. To compound the human tragedy, of course, Anne Maguire committed suicide in 1980. In a very poignant open letter written in February 1997, headlined Tragedy That Led to Our Hour of Great Hope, and published in Citizen, which was the newspaper of the Peace People, which is available to download on the Divided Society website. This is how it displays on the site, and then when downloaded you get the full article. Mairead Maguire wrote on the 17th anniversary of her sister's death, imploring Northern Ireland's politicians and paramilitaries to struggle in a non-violent way to build a just and peaceful society. She recalled the words her sister Anne had chosen for her children's gravestones. They died so others might live in peace. It is a privilege of the Linen Hall to hold material recollecting these extraordinary events and people making change for peace. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today. My name is Lorraine Burke. I'm part of the private records team here in PRONI. I will just get my presentation up here and take over from where Samantha left off. So I just want to give you a very, very brief sort of background to PRONI, to the Public Record Office. We are, of course, the official archive for Northern Ireland. We hold over 3 million documents. So the story goes anyway. I'd say we hold quite a lot more than that, but we've never accurately counted them, that come from both official and private sources. So the acquisition of records from official sources has been a statutory responsibility of PRONI since its creation under the Public Records Act, Northern Ireland of 1923. So on the basis of that act, PRONI holds the records of government departments and non-departmental public bodies, the records of local administration, such as records of the courts or records of schools. We also hold at least a third of our records come from a range of private sources, which is something that not everyone is aware of. And those sources, those privately deposited sources, range from churches, businesses, political parties, families and individuals, charities, you name it, we hold them here. And I will give you an overview of some of those records that we hold from both private and official sources that provide an insight into those that made a contribution to peace in the 1960s and 70s. So Samantha, actually it's about a year ago, Samantha, you were here with us before in October when PRONI held a series of talks to focus on the anniversary of the civil rights movement, at the beginning of the civil rights movement in Northern Ireland. And many of those PRONI sources that featured as part of talks and events then, I suppose, are of relevance to today's talk and the focus of today's talk. Many of those that participated in the civil rights movement, specifically at an individual level, are relevant to today. So among the private collections that we hold in PRONI are the papers of Kevin Boyle. Kevin Boyle was a solicitor. He was spokesman for People's Democracy, later became public relations officer for the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. He went on to become a prominent human rights lawyer, lawyer of international standing. He was co-founder of the Irish Centre for Human Rights at NUI Galway. I suppose the large bulk of his personal papers are held at NUI Galway, but we have a very significant collection here of Kevin's personal papers which provide an insight into the early years of the civil rights movement. They contain his handwritten notes, his research papers, and a huge amount of printed material and ephemera that provide a really fascinating insight into that key moment in the civil rights movement. Another important individual within the civil rights movement was Franco Critic. He was a member of the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association since its inaugural meeting in 1967. He became the organisation's press officer and held the positions of chairman and vice chairman also of that organisation. So again, another fascinating collection that provides an insight into that period in our history. There's a wealth of correspondence within the collection, letters of support from individuals, particularly a range of Irish American groups, letters of support to the civil rights movement. This telegram rather, is from Kilmer Myers, the Bishop of California, who was an outspoken critic on the Vietnam War, and who here writes to give his support. Your many friends in America, Protestant and Catholic alike, pray that your peaceful demonstration may underscore the compelling need for an end to political, religious and economic injustice to all citizens of Northern Ireland. And this is just one drawing that's within Franco Critic's papers, that he obviously, there's no other pieces like this within the collection. He obviously kept it because it meant something to him, and I think highlighted to him and others like him the need for peace. It's a child's drawing showing their perception of the Troubles. So as I say, I think it was something that meant a great deal to Franco Critic and probably compelled him with his work. Moving on to another individual, a fascinating individual who made a really immense contribution to the peace movement in Northern Ireland. PRONI holds a very large collection of personal and research papers of Dennis Barrett. Dennis Barrett was born in Dunmurry in 1914. He was a community worker, an author, and a very influential voice in the peace movement. Among the various positions that he served as, he was secretary for what we now know as Bryson House. And during his time there, he helped establish many new ventures, including Citizens' Rights Bureau, the voluntary services overseas section within Bryson House, which still endures today, voluntary services Belfast, and family supports unit, again, which continues in operation in Bryson House to this day. And within this collection, a huge wealth of correspondence. Included among it is this letter, which I think highlights some of the many difficulties on a practical level that those involved in peace initiatives met with. So here Dennis Barrett is writing to Professor Mccomb of New Jersey, and he's talking about a youth group, an international youth group, which had been running successfully in Derry and doing great work for young people and for orphans, had good relations with people locally, but they were accused of bringing in folk we have been accused of bringing in folk who helped to make and throw petrol bombs. So the finger of suspicion pointed upon them, and Barrett writes, but of course our whole raison d'etre is Christian non-violence and the enthronement of love, and to stop folk throwing bombs. So he was also, as I say, an author. He published a number of important publications, including a book which he co-wrote with Professor Charles Carter, entitled The Northern Ireland Problems, a Study in Group Relations, which was a very, very influential publication at the time, and I suppose it took the position at the time. It attempted to examine the reasons for the conflict and the points of the conflict in a dispassionate way, and as Barrett said, it was an attempt to try and help reasonable men to think about them in a reasonable way. He also published another volume with Arthur Booth, which was the result of several years of conversations with Quaker communities across Ireland and Scotland and England. And within it, I have a short quote from it there, but I think it's worth quoting at length. Barrett writes, there are two problems in Northern Ireland. One is the border, and the other is the reconciliation of the two communities within the border. It can be said with no little justification that one is a function of the other, that the alienation of the communities is a consequence of the disunity of Ireland and vice versa. But, whatever the future place and role of Northern Ireland, it seems clear that no progress is possible in this field until radical changes take place both in Northern Ireland and the Republic. Above all, the reconciliation of the two communities in Northern Ireland is an absolute prerequisite. Without it, anything is possible. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon, I slipped up there. With it, anything is possible. Without it, nothing is possible. Okay, so words, of course, that are still so relevant for us today. Dennis Barrett died in his late 70s and received many glowing obituaries and testimonials. And one of them was from Peter McLaughlin, who was then Secretary of Bryson House, and he referred to Dennis Barrett as the father of the peace movement in Northern Ireland. So a fascinating individual and a really, really fascinating archive that merits looking at further. So moving on then from individuals, just to highlight a sample of some of the organisations that feature within PRONI collections and within which are individuals who worked on an organisational level to promote peace and to promote good relations. So included within those would be the Protestant and Catholic Encounter, and we have two different catalogue reference numbers for that collection. One specifically relates to the East Belfast branch of PACE, which was set up in 1968, obviously an ecumenical organisation, set up to promote good relations between the different political and religious communities in Northern Ireland. The collection comprises minutes, again a wealth of correspondence, and printed material and ephemera. Another collection to mention are the papers of the New Ulster movement, The New Ulster movement was a non-sectarian organisation established in 1969 and committed to furthering peace in society through political means. Just as I was looking through the collection, and here are just a sample of some of the pamphlets produced by the Ulster New Movement, and again, plus a change, I suppose. Here we have the reform of Stormont and a consideration of Northern Ireland's position within the common market. But as part of its work, the New Ulster Movement had a very, very active letter writing campaign. It organised talks, it monitored the media, published books and pamphlets, all urging reform. It came in for a lot of criticism, I think, from established politicians, and there's one letter in the collection dated to 1969, and a letter writer is taking issue with Brian Faulkner's dismissal of the movement. You know, the letter writer says, "It's clear that Mr. Walker, the chairman of the New Ulster Movement, and his colleagues are making an honest and constructive contribution to peace and progress in Ulster. But Mr. Faulkner is reported as having arrogantly dismissed them as people who derive their ideas from cocktail chatter and their information from public libraries." So, not always easy ever, is it, to be an agitator for peace, I suppose. The letters within the collection are, as I say, the New Ulster Movement, they were prolific letter writers, so there's a huge amount of correspondence there, and very, very interesting. And here's one of a number of letters that their chairman wrote, in this instance, to The Guardian in 1971. And he says, "Perhaps the most encouraging sign is the realisation that, important as the civil rights claims of 2 to 3 years ago were, they dealt in one sense with the shadow rather than the substance. The fundamental question, which is so slowly dawning in the political consciousness of people here, is that in order to create a united community in Northern Ireland, a democratic way must be found of sharing political power." Okay, so I suppose it just underlines the importance of individuals and organisations like that, just opening up channels of communication and shaking up old ways of thinking. Sorry, I'll just go back there. I can see I still have a little bit of time, so I'm going to quote another letter from Brian Walker. He's talking about progress that has been made. It's a letter dated in 1971, and you know, he's saying there are less reasons for being cynical. And he writes, "Last month, in the space of a mere 10 days, 27,000 of us signed a petition for sanity based on reconciliation and justice. A fortnight ago, 10,000 people defied Paisleyite opposition and IRA intimidation to demonstrate their unity at a deeply moving peace rally in the centre of Belfast. Last Sunday, a further 3,000 people demonstrated their unity in the small border town of Newry. Others are planned and will take place. The silent majority is beginning to move." Okay. So just quickly to note that from a research point of view, it's always useful to look at the position of various church leaders and churches of different denomination when considering peace and the movement towards peace. And PRONI has a number of significant collections there that would be of relevance, including, for example, the papers of Reverend Eric Gallagher, and this very large collection that we have relating to the Irish Council of Churches. The Irish Council of Churches was founded in 1923, and it's the national body through which member churches from across a range of Protestant and Orthodox, Reformed and Independent church traditions meet together and discuss a wide variety of issues. The archive includes a very significant component relating to the Irish Interchurch Project. So in the 1970s, the council began to talk with the Irish Catholic Church. These meetings became formalised over time to be known as the Interchurch Project. And there's some very, very interesting papers, correspondence, position papers within there, which outline various church initiatives on matters such as sectarianism, peace building, community relations, and confidence building programs. Yes, no, I don't have time. I'll just go on very quickly. As I said at the beginning, I work as part of the private records team, but I just want to highlight some official records that we have within our holdings, which would be also of relevance to people who are researching within this area. PRONI's official records can also provide a really, really fascinating insight into the contribution that government ministers and their officials made towards peace initiatives. So I've just highlighted there some potential archives that you might want to look at. So the records of the Cabinet Secretariat, for example, and particularly within that larger archive, CAB Bar 9 reflects work that came before Cabinet from the various government ministries and includes issues such as security and financial and economic matters relating to Northern Ireland. The Home Affairs HA archive is vast, but it treats on a number of relevant issues. Again, the running of the police, fire and prison service, administration of criminal justice, public order, emergency legislation, etc., etc. As I say, it's a huge archive, but if you drill down into it, for example, HA 32 contains papers relating to, for example, civil unrest, protest, and disturbances. And then moving on, I must say one of the good things about preparing today's talk was that I actually got to look at some official records, which I don't normally do, and these records from the Central Secretariat of the Northern Ireland Civil Service were just absolutely fascinating in terms of the topics, the broad range of topics that they covered, and the minute level of detail that they went into. So, what do I have here now? Subjects included communities, outreach, cross-cultural initiatives, identity, the Irish language, inclusion, racism, ethnicity, etc. And this one here that I was looking at, what is it? Schemes for the improvement of the environment, spruce up campaign and public cleansing. And on the surface you might think, oh, that's hardly going to be very interesting, but it started off looking at derelict buildings and the problems they caused and how those issues could be resolved. And then it moved on to consideration of, well, how do we instill civic pride in people, And then it moved on to, is there any way that we can attract people in, tourists into Northern Ireland? How will we do that? And it was just very interesting to see some of the things they were thinking about. So they talked about the need to brighten up Ulster, as they said, through festivals, arts and entertainment. And there's various minutes exchanged between different government officials. And 1 minute of 1975, April 1975, says, "It seems that much more should be made of the singing and acting qualities of the Ulster population." Okay, and then so ideas floating from that one stem to, how about in the early summer, a big pop festival to appeal to the teenagers? Many sober citizens will object to the noise, the mess, the drugs, the sex, but never mind, hold a normal park. So you see where great things came from. So they are really a fascinating source of information and well worth delving into. Just point out another couple of potential sources of information. CON, the Northern Ireland Constitutional Convention. So established in 1974 as a result of the collapse of the Northern Ireland Executive following on from the Ulster Workers' Council strike. So this was a consultative body. It didn't have any legislative powers, but it debated motions and considered proposals put forward by a range of interest groups, including the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. Another very useful source of information, Creole Community Relations Commission, set up in the 1969 to encourage harmonious community relations and discourage discriminatory practices. It could also advise and make recommendations to ministers. So that's just highlighting some of the sources we have, and no more than Samantha, I'm risk averse and I'm not going to do a live demonstration of our catalogue, but you can search our catalogue by going to the PRONI website, which is within the NI Direct larger website. I'll give you the website details at the end, so you can search the catalogue. If you put in something as broad as peace, you'll bring back, I think I brought back, 3,000 or 4,000 hits. You can obviously limit your keyword search by date, and here, by limiting it to the 60s and 70s, we reduce it to 385 hits, I think it was. Once there, you can scroll through the options, and of course, obviously, just be imaginative in terms of the keywords that you're putting in. Think of key individuals or key events, or yes, certainly you can search using peace or reconciliation or community relations. But here you'll see the catalogue reference number. If you see something there that catches your eye, look at this in community relations, women's role in the peace process. You can view the catalogue description there, which may be quite short or lengthy depending on the item, and most importantly it'll tell you whether it's on open access or whether it's closed. If it is closed and you would like to access it, please write to us and we'll see if we can facilitate your request. If we can't, we'll let you know. You can also browse the catalogue, which can be useful if you're wanting to say, look at a particular collection, say the Dennis Barrett papers, and you're wanting to get a better handle on it. You can browse through the different levels within the collection. You can see it's made up of different component parts. See there, personal correspondence and Bar C research papers. So you'll see the building blocks of those books that Dennis Barrett wrote that I mentioned earlier on. Yes, here's our opening times, as I say, if you want any more information about a collection or how to access it, please email us. This is our website address. We are also active sometimes, all the time, on Facebook and Twitter. Now I'll hand over to my colleague Lindsay, who will tell you about a project that she and her colleague Laura are working on through our public services section. I'll just finish up here. Cheers, Lindsay.
Thanks, Lorraine. Don't worry, I know this says that I've got 29 slides, and I'm only going to use the first 4, so we're not going to be here too long, don't worry. What I have come to do today is really shine a light and plug a little bit a project that PRONI is working on in partnership with the Linnenhall Library as well, and it's called Making the Future. So Making the Future is a project that is funded under the current Peace 4 programme. And it brings together a number of institutions to do a number of different things. We are led by the Nerve Centre, which is a creative learning centre, and they have brought together PRONI, the Linnenhall Library and National Museums Northern Ireland to deliver a series of programmes across a number of different themes. But what they are all trying to do is empower people to use our collections, and you've heard how diverse our collections are in PRONI and in the Linnenhall Library. And to use those collections to explore the past, take a look at where we are now and build a powerful vision for the future. And it brings together participants from various different community, cultural, religious backgrounds. And we hope so far that we're helping them all to tell their own story, and we're uncovering lots of new stories as we go along. As I said, the project has 9 different strands of work. And you can see the titles of them all there. Some of them are very self-explanatory, other ones not so much. But at the minute, PRONI and the London Hall Library are working together on Women in the Archives, and the Women in the Archives team is myself and my colleague Laura here from PRONI, and we have a colleague, Jason Burke, in the London Hall Library as well. And essentially, Women in the Archives has been doing a number of things. We curated 2 exhibitions. One was here in PRONI and one was in the London Hall Library. They have since combined and are currently on tour. We had a series of events in the springtime, looking at lots of different elements of women's history. But at the heart of our programme is community engagement programmes, and we hope to bring, it says there, over 300. I've since found out it's actually more like 450 participants through our programme is what we have to get through from various different communities to sort of look particularly at women's history and women's contribution to our lives. And what we have uncovered along the way are lots of new stories about women in particular who were contributing to peace at a kind of grassroots level. And what we want to do essentially is put their stories into the archive so that as we go forward and continue to look at this area of our history, we will find out more and more diverse stories that we maybe hadn't heard before. And we're doing this in a number of ways. When we work with groups, particularly women's centres and community groups, some of them want to tell their own story, some of them want to look at an element of history that's already ongoing, but we do ask everybody to scrapbook at the end. And I just want to show you one example of a group that we worked with in Portadown. And at the end of the scrapbook, we were left with a series of kind of profiles of women. And I'll leave this up here at the front, you can look at it afterwards. But they've entitled it The Wonder Women of Drumcree Community Centre, Women Who Deserve Statues. And they're basically all about women who developed the community centre that these groups meet in, and the work that they did for community relations in their area. And they're stories that really should be told, and we're really fascinated to find out the amount of stories that are out there and people who did contribute to peace in a lot of different ways, and we're trying to put them back into the archives. And we're doing that by these scrapbooks, which will all become part of the collections at PRONI and the London Hall Library, and but also by taking oral recordings that will be part of an oral archive held here in PRONI. So that's all I'm going to say about our project. Again, nobody likes to use live websites, but I did get this to come up before we started. But we do have a website for the entire Making the Future project, but you can look at all of our news, any resources that we develop will all be on this website. So that's the best place to find out more information. And then my final plug is a plug for PRONI. And it's really for another talk that if you've come to this one and you're interested in it, if you would like to find out more about a particular woman who made a contribution to peace, then on the 7th of October, PRONI is hosting a book launch. And it's for the book Sheila Murnaghan, Stormont's Only Liberal MP by Ruth Illingworth, and Ruth will be here to speak. And it's between 1 and 2 p.m. as well, so lunchtime, book launch on the 7th of October. So I'd encourage you all to come to that because Sheila Murnaghan is a really interesting woman, and we're really looking forward to that. Thank you all very much.